Welcome to Your Personal Power Pod, a podcast about aligning yourself with the life you want. And here are your hosts, Sandy Abel and Shannon Young.
Shannon, another beautiful day. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
Excellent, thank you. And I'm really excited about today's episode. It's not a really fun one. Well, part of it's fun, but it's important.
Which is a word we use a lot.
We
Hopefully, all of the things that we talk about are important. But yes, this one especially when we live in the time we live in, when things are changing all the time.
Right. Back 100 years ago, when you lived on the farm, people did what they did and they did what their grandparents did, and it always worked. And everybody lived in their own little neighborhood because they couldn't travel far and wide and they were set in their ways, but it worked for them.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, things have changed so much and technology has made it so that we can learn everything and reach out to people we never thought we could reach out to. And airlines and such have made it so we can travel the world and go to space, and everything has changed so much. Some people are really excited about that, but some people have trouble with it.
Yeah. So today we're talking about rigidity, flexibility, and adaptability, and how they can affect your life and what to do about that if you're struggling with being rigid or being too flexible.
Exactly. Because the ideal is to have a balance of all three. When you're rigid, it means that you have a strict adherence to your rules, routines, beliefs. You say, this is the way I've always done it, or this is what I've always believed, so this is what I'm going to do. And you're uncompromising and inflexible.
Yes, and along with that might come the tendency to be critical or judgmental of other people, and also being critical and judgmental of change, being really stuck in your ways and not being able to change how you do things or how you think about things.
Exactly. We've talked about being comfy in your comfort zone, and change upsets that. And a lot of people who are rigid in their thoughts or behaviors don't want to get out of their comfort zone. They think that it works for them and they just want to stay there. So they're closed-minded and unwilling to acknowledge that there might be another way to look at things.
Mm-hmm.
Being rigid can actually provide a sense of order and predictability, which many people find comforting.
Yeah, there's something to be said for having a routine or having strong principles that guide you through your life. But you also have to be able to look at them and decide whether they're holding you back or keeping you from growing.
Exactly. If you have a sense of stability that you take to extremes so you won't even look at or listen to anybody else, it can lead to resistance to change and missed opportunities. Increased stress when you're faced with the unexpected, and it can cause problems in relationships where you're unable to truly listen and compromise.
But on the other hand, if you're too flexible and just willing to go along with everything, and you're just entirely too open to change and willing to bend for anything or anybody, that causes problems too.
Exactly. Being flexible is crucial for adapting to new circumstances and finding creative solutions. If you say, oh my goodness, this thing is happening, I'm just going to do what I've always done, even though that never works, that's being rigid. If you say, oh, this thing is happening, what can I do differently to try to work with it? That's being flexible. Although you don't want to be too flexible, because then you don't have any boundaries and it makes it challenging to stay true to your values.
Yeah, you have to have a pretty good sense of self, know what's important to you, and then decide how you're going to react to a situation or a person or a concept. Because if you know what your values are, then it makes it much easier to bend where necessary. But if one of your values is stability, then it might become a little bit harder to be flexible.
Right. It's a balance. We use that word a lot because that's what it is, especially with these three ways of approaching things. Sometimes it's really important to be rigid and say, no, this is my value. I'm sticking to it. I don't deface other people's property or I don't steal.
Mm-hmm.
Being flexible is, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a time or a place. I remember back in the day when I took a philosophy class, one of the challenges they gave us was to say, okay, so if you have a belief that stealing is wrong and you would never, ever, ever do that, and everybody raised their hand, yes, exactly right. And then he said, okay, what if your family is starving and your children are about to die from malnutrition? Is stealing a loaf of bread wrong? And I was like, oh, now there's a dilemma. Because it's a conflict of values. One is to take care of your children and keep them safe, and the other one is you don't steal. And you have to decide. If you're faced with that kind of challenge and you're just rigid enough to say, no, I'm just not going to do it, your children are going to die. So being rigid and then flexible enough to say, well, maybe I need to shift a little bit because one value outweighs the other. And people who are rigid can't do that. But
Right.
being flexible is also an important part of any successful relationship. You have to be able to communicate, listen to the other person's viewpoint. These days, people are very adamant and feel strongly about a whole lot of things, political things, just all kinds of things. And if you are not in the same corner as they are about your beliefs, the ideal is to have an open conversation. Both of you share your beliefs without having the other person judge them, and maybe even take it in and pay attention to it. Nowadays, it seems like people are more about judging and being inflexible, being rigid and just saying it's my way or the highway. And if you don't believe the way I do, then we can't be friends anymore. And that's so sad, because if you want to have a successful relationship with your partner or your children, your adult children, your little children, or your friends or your colleagues at work, you have got to be able to listen and be flexible. Flexibility is a hugely important skill.
And I think there's more going on in those situations, especially when we're talking about politics and people digging their heels in. I think there's oftentimes a lack of information. And so we stand by what we do know instead of being able to have a fully intelligent, informed conversation about things. We know a few bullet points and don't know the story behind them and feel like we're being challenged. So we stand by those points of view, even if maybe we knew more about them or where they came from or the entire story, we might be a little bit more open-minded. And I also think it comes down to defining ourselves and maybe not looking at our values. I know that some of the conversations my husband and I have are heated. We like to get into debates about things. If I'm feeling like my point of view in general is challenged more often than I would like it to be, then I'm more likely to stand in one place and not bend, because it comes down to, instead of this idea isn't being accepted by you, it's like, you never let me be right. And so I'm
Ooh.
more likely to be defensive, so
Sure.
just kind of
Yeah.
being aware of what's going on for you and where you're feeling challenged and how that makes you question yourself. Like, there's so much more going on here than just the one thing in front of us.
Yes. And you take an objective discussion and made it personal.
Right.
And once it becomes personal, and a lot of people do that, then your ability to think clearly and really listen goes out the window. So it's good that you
Right.
know that you do that. That's important. And I think lots and lots and lots of people do that.
Well, you and I talk about this a lot in our relationships. I truly think we pick partners for a lot of their great qualities, but also because of the buttons they push for us. And those are things we need to work out in this lifetime. And so there are definitely things that you and I talk about having, that's a button for me, or that's a life lesson for me. Things that
Mhm.
we have to work on, we pick people who will help us work on those. And oftentimes that's uncomfortable.
It's not fun, but it's important. And the vital thing is that we each have to know what our vulnerable spots are, what our buttons are. And if we start to get heated, realize, wait a minute, this isn't the other person. They're not personally attacking us. They're not calling us names or hitting us or anything. They're saying, this is what I believe. This is what I think. And if you take it personally, they're not doing it to you. You're doing it to yourself.
Right.
That's because you're stuck in your rigidity and wanting to be right and wanting to be seen as right. And in the process, you lose your flexibility.
And if you're talking with somebody about a challenging topic or an uncomfortable topic and they make it personal,
Mhm.
that's probably because they don't have anything else to offer up. They
Exactly.
don't have more information. They can't explain why they think the way they think, and you don't have to go there. Our inclination is to clam up and fight back. Just knowing that their inability to be flexible and open-minded isn't about you at all.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. And we should all remember that when somebody starts attacking, just stop.
Mhm.
Just say, wait a minute, this is not a personal discussion, and I will not accept being attacked. So either you change your tone or I'm leaving. And then
Right.
you get up and leave if they don't change. And they may not even realize that they're doing it, but they're sticking to rigidity and you're being flexible. It's very important to know yourself and be able to stand up for yourself.
Yes, and to be kind of a hovering above the situation and recognizing for whatever reason, this other person has this need to think this, believe this, say this, whatever. And then you get to decide how you want to respond to it. And that's what being adaptable is about.
Exactly. Adaptability is being able to adjust to new circumstances and being willing to be open minded and learn or relearn or unlearn. And when you're adaptable, it allows you to thrive in a world of constant change.
My husband and I were in Seattle about a month or two ago and just driving around looking at stuff. And that is something that I absolutely love to do, just exploring places I've never been. I'm not intending to get lost, but I have a pretty good sense of direction. And we were not out of the city at all. We were definitely within cell service, and we have God knows how many phones in the car and, things like that. And he was getting more and more uncomfortable. And I finally just said, "What's going on with you? You seem really tense." And he said, "I don't like not knowing where in the world I am."
Yeah.
I didn't know that about him.
Hmm.
And it required me to say, oh, okay, I need to change my idea of adventure when we are adventuring together.
Yes. Because knowing where in the world he is gives him a sense of comfort and control.
Yes, which is important in his life for a variety of reasons.
Right. But so he can feel that he can deal with whatever's coming ahead, even if he doesn't know what that is. And you're willing to just walk into whatever and say, hey, let's see what's over there.
I'm here. Let's do this.
Exactly. And the important thing is that for you two to function well together, it's important for you both to know how the other one feels about being lost in the city. I mean, you weren't feeling lost. You felt, oh, this is an adventure. Let's go see what's there. And he was feeling lost because he
Right.
didn't know where he was.
And in that circumstance, we both had different needs. I have
Hmm.
a need for that kind of adventure. He has a need to avoid that kind of adventure.
Right.
But at least I was able to say, in this case, his need is bigger than mine.
Yes. And so you were adaptable. You
Yep.
said, okay, fine. This works for you. And so I want you to be happy and comfy right now. So let's do what works for you.
Yeah.
When you're adaptable, you view challenges as opportunities for growth rather than as obstacles.
Ooh, that's good. Maybe that's why it's so hard to become that way sometimes.
If you are adaptable, it's the way you can get through things that are new and different.
So, how do we get to a place of being adaptable if our tendency is to stand by what's comfortable and close and familiar?
Well, first of all, you have to be aware of whatever the situation is and determine which is the most productive way to approach it. Is it better to be rigid or just stand your ground?
Hmm.
Or is it better to be flexible and adaptable? And then you pay attention and be aware of your tendencies. You understand what you need, and he was clear about what he needed.
Hmm.
And so that way you guys could share thoughts and decide how to proceed. If you lean towards rigidity, try introducing small changes into your routine and see how you deal with that. It's also important to be willing to open your mind and listen without judgment. I hope everybody in the world can learn to listen without judgment. Listening does not mean you agree with what's being said. It simply means that you are respecting the other person enough to let them share their thoughts. Guy, listening without judgment is huge.
Yeah, you want other people to hear you and respect your right to think and believe what you think and believe. So it only translates that that should be reciprocated.
Absolutely. And if you're naturally flexible, set clear boundaries to maintain the stability and make sure that people don't run all over you all the time. You
Hmm.
do need your boundaries. And in order to be adaptable, you have to practice mindfulness, embrace the uncertainty that life brings, and be willing to see that as an opportunity to learn and grow instead of as a challenge that's going to harm you.
I've noticed that the people in my life who have a very clear sense of themselves have a good relationship with themselves.
Hmm.
They are much more able to let other people be who they are.
Hmm.
They don't have to argue and force their opinion on others. They don't have to always turn situations in the direction they want them to go because they trust themselves and their reactions to things, and they know what they value, and they're able to let everybody be.
Right, because their self-worth or identity does not depend on other people agreeing with what they're saying or who they are.
Right.
If you have good, solid self-esteem, you can claim your personal power, which is what our podcast is all about, is strong self-esteem and personal power. And then you can be firm in who you are without expecting other people to be supportive of that. It's nice if they are. It's more fun if they are, but you don't need it to support your identity.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
It is. And rigidity, flexibility, and adaptability are all important qualities. They're all important ways of dealing with things. To do it effectively, you have to be aware of who you are and create a balance. Know when to be rigid and stand your ground. Know when to be flexible and listen and consider other opportunities. Then know when to be adaptable and go with the new circumstances. All three of those, when you juggle them and balance them, will help you create a great life.
Yes, adaptability in and of itself is not just the way to operate, because there are definitely situations where you should stand by what you believe and not budge from that. But being able to adapt is a hugely important life skill.
Exactly. So the bottom line is that it's important for you to be able to maintain the balance. When you do that, you will find that your relationships flow nicely and your ability to deal with whatever comes is much easier and that your life is much better. It's all about balance. So the bottom line is being rigid, flexible, and adaptable are three ways of dealing with your life. And when you are rigid, you blindly hold tight to your beliefs, values, and attitudes and are not able to listen to or hear other viewpoints. Being rigid can also negatively impact relationships because you're unwilling to listen or compromise. When you're flexible, you're clear on where you're coming from, but are also open to hearing where others are coming from and are willing to consider their point of view and possibly compromise or change. Being flexible fosters healthy relationships because you're willing to listen, really hear the other person, and work with them. When you're adaptable, you're willing and able to easily adjust to new situations. And it's important for each of us to be aware of how we approach situations and people and ensure that you are using the right approach for each situation. In order to live a balanced, happy life, it's important to use a combination of these three things, each at the appropriate time.
And anyone can learn to be flexible, adaptable, and rigid. You don't want to learn to be rigid.
And you may come from a family where you were taught one way or the other. And if you come from a family that was very rigid in their beliefs on religion or politics or all kinds of other things, it may be difficult for you as an adult to branch out of that. But when you're able to do that, you will be amazed at how positively it will impact your relationships and your life.
Thank you, Sandy.
And thank you, Shannon, and many thanks to our listeners.
Absolutely. And please keep communicating with us. We love your emails. We love your stories about how our podcast affect your life or just about the lessons you've learned about self-esteem and personal power. And we also really enjoy it when you let us know which topics you'd like us to address in future episodes. That's really helpful and super fun to know what's on your mind and what's important to you. And if you would like to review our podcast, please do so wherever you stream, or you can just visit us at our website at yourpersonalpowerpod.com, click contact, and drop us an email. If you want to learn about coaching and how it can change your life, it's super powerful, and you can talk to Sandy about it at sandy@insidejobscoach.com. We look so forward to hearing from you, and until next time, find your power and change your life.